You are listening to Lex Talk, More Action. Today, my co-host is Melissa Tibbs. How you doing, Melissa?
Well, sir, how are you?
I am doing pretty good.
Good to see you again.
You know, I don't know if you noticed, but it's snowing outside.
It is snowing.
It is super cold as well.
Yes.
And in this Kentucky weather, it just catches me. You know, I've been here all my life, but it still catches me off guard. Now, I was watching TV Sunday night, and I saw the winter weather advisory. So what did I do? I get up, I go outside, I look, and I said, it's just spitting rain. No big deal.
Yep.
But my grandbaby had been by because of Thanksgiving, so she kind of gets a little perturbed when Pawpaw wants to watch the news. So we've had cartoons and all this stuff on. So I've missed the weather. And I woke up Monday.
Oh, nice.
And saw snow and just about lost it.
Yeah.
And it just so happens I just moved my winter clothes down into the new closet. Do you? Is that something you do?
Oh yes. There's the routine switch out.
Yeah, I you know, I'm a big guy, and I'm sitting here now sweating, like Lord have mercy. So I don't do much winter clothes, but woo.
Well, I can one-up you on that. I had the classic winter weather challenge, whereas I go to get in my car to go to work, and my car battery is all the way dead, all the way, with no clicks, no anything. And so since I am fortunate to be able to park inside a garage, it just makes it that much more challenging to figure out how you're going to fix this problem. But luckily, my husband came to the rescue. So see, good there.
That's you know, membership has its privileges.
That's right.
Yeah, I believe I probably have a slow leak in one of my tires. And I keep looking at it like, it's
You're going to
cold.
want to do something about that, sir.
I know, but I want it to be just a little bit warmer before I do it.
Right.
But you know how that works.
Yes.
I keep waiting, and then I'll have to do it when I am not ready to. But this weather has just really been cold. And what was it, 20-something already? First day of December.
Yes.
Welcome.
Yes.
Welcome. But I guess that helps us get into the Christmas spirit, or the for the holidays, and just, we're at home, so it's all good.
That's right.
We can look at the nice snow outside and stay warm inside.
Yep.
Well, what is going on today? Who is going to be on the show today?
Well,
Melissa?
Without further ado, I'd like to invite our listeners to welcome Mike Halligan, the CEO of God's Pantry Food Bank. He is here to talk to us a little bit about kind of a look back at 2020, what's been going on for God's Pantry Food Bank and the people that they serve. So welcome, Mike, and why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Hey,
well, first, thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it. And I really enjoyed the commentary on the weather here for the last couple of minutes, because I moved to Kentucky from Chicago.
Yeah.
So it's all relative.
One up us here.
Nice.
It's all relative. And I was born and raised in Muscatine County, Iowa, along the Mississippi River.
Oh, wow.
So I can remember when I went to school at Iowa State University, lived on the north side of campus, and in the morning on the way to school, it'd take me 10 minutes to get down to campus, and on the way back at night, because I was going against the north wind, it took me twice as long to get back home.
Wow.
So, it's all relative.
All relative.
That sounds like one of those stories, I went to school in 14 feet of snow, and
Well, I've actually got pictures of me in 14 feet of snow.
See, I can't win.
When we lived in New England for about 4 years, and our youngest son, Riley, was 2 at the time, and he loved to swing. And in New England, you get these things called nor'easters, and it'll dump 12, 15, 16, 20 inches of snow in a matter of hours.
Yep.
And the first winter that we were there, we had over 150 inches of snow on the ground.
Wow.
And we carved this little path back to the swing set. And the only way that we knew Riley had made it to the swing set was when he got on the swing and he started swinging, we would see his feet come up above the snowbank. And that's the only way that we knew that he made it to the to the swing set in the middle of the winter.
That wind coming off the water in Chicago,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It comes right
There's
through
not many
you.
things that rival that.
Oh, it'll cut right through you. It'll get to your soul real quick.
So just a little bit more about me.
Sure.
Born and raised in Muscatine County, Iowa. Came to Lexington to work with the team at God's Pantry Food Bank in 2017, right at the beginning of the year. Been here about 4 years. Absolutely love the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And there's two things that really stand out to me. One is the passion that I see in people. And the second is the compassion that I see in people for one another.
Yeah.
Yep.
More than any place I've ever lived, people genuinely care about one another, and they want to make a difference, and they want to help those who need assistance for whatever reason they may need help. And that is one of the things that drew me to the Commonwealth, and one of the things that drew me to God's Pantry Food Bank. And in 4 years, I can attest to the fact that those first impressions are genuine.
Yeah.
And I've seen so much good in so many people in such a difficult time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And, you know, this pandemic has done a lot of things in a lot of ways that we all wish weren't here.
Yep.
Right.
But the one thing that has been very clear to me is it's brought out the best in so many people in so many ways.
Yeah.
And 4 years ago, I thought I saw that. And in the last 8 months, it's definitely here, and no surprise at all to me about that.
Yeah, Melissa and I were talking before the show that this pandemic has become the great equalizer.
Yeah.
A lot of people can sympathize, but this pandemic is allowing us to really have empathy for each other,
Right.
because it's changing. There's nothing really steady about this pandemic, and it has no respect of a person, color, creed, economics. It doesn't matter. This pandemic is really reaching all of us in such a way that the only way we are going to survive is if we come together,
Right.
and work together.
Yep.
Because this is going to affect us all.
Well, Mike, you said something that it's worth noting for our listeners that as we record this, it's Giving Tuesday. And that is the kind of formal or non-traditional even way of kicking off the giving season. And usually nonprofits like ourselves use this time, this opportunity to share about what we do, who we are, and then also through that be able to thank those who come alongside us. So for the benefit of our listeners, can you give us a little bit of the history, the background of God's Pantry? You mentioned your history is 4 years, but talk to us a little bit about what God's Pantry Food Bank is here to do, and then we'll talk a little bit about how you've been able to manage what you do throughout this year.
Sure. So our history dates back to 1955, 65 years ago this year. A woman by the name of Mim Hunt, who was born and raised in Lexington, moved to New York City for a while, saw poverty in a different light, lost her first husband in World War II, came back to Lexington and set out to make her life's work to end poverty and hunger in her beloved hometown. Started distributing groceries in her neighborhood out of the back of her station wagon, and stocked food in the basement of her home in her pantry. And in her memoirs, one of the things that she talked about was individuals that she knew would come to her basement and would help distribute food. And when the cupboard was bare, they would call it Mim's Pantry, and she would correct them and say, no, when the cupboard is bare, God provides. This is God's Pantry. So that's how we got our name.
Wow.
For 65 years, we have been focused on hunger relief and on addressing food insecurity and helping those who may be experiencing hunger get access to food that they may not otherwise have. One example of that is the program that we just did last week, which we call Sharing Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
We've been doing that for 27 years, started in 94. And this past week, we distributed about 5,800 Sharing Thanksgiving baskets to families who may have otherwise not had food on their table for Thanksgiving. So imagine, a Thanksgiving dinner, and not having food on your table to spend time with loved ones during Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
That's what our work is about. It's about access to food. It's about access to nutrition, to households, individuals, children, seniors who may not otherwise have that nutritious food that they need to sustain their lives.
We know that a lot of our listeners come from all different circumstances, but many of them are students or service providers who are working in maybe a different component of helping people, especially those who are living in poverty. So for the benefit of everyone, can you talk to us a little bit about what you describe food security as, or food insecurity, whichever angle you want to take that from?
So food insecurity is not having the economic resources to be able to consistently put food on your table, to have access to food to lead a healthy life. So by contrast, food security is that you have enough food to lead a nutritious, healthy lifestyle. Food insecurity is, there are many different factors that put someone into a circumstance, but typically it's through some unexpected or unforeseen event that causes one to have to start making difficult decisions on whether to take what money they may have and spend it on medical expenses, or on housing costs, or on energy, or on food, or on transportation costs, or on daycare for their kids so they can still work. All kinds of different economic issues that one has to deal with. Ironically, somewhere in the neighborhood of a third of the folks that we serve live above the poverty line.
Yes.
Many are working a job or two jobs, but they don't have enough economic resources to lead a healthy, nutritious life, even though they're working. Yes. It's pretty daunting when you start to see situations that can emerge that lead someone to be food insecure. And I'll tell you a quick story just to kind of help.
Yeah.
We've got some good friends in the Chicago area. It's the brother and sister-in-law of our former next-door neighbors. And he drove a truck for a beverage company. And on his way to work one morning, he was broadsided at an intersection and is paralyzed from the neck down. He was the sole breadwinner for his family, a family of 6 kids. They're food insecure now. Their medical expenses are insurmountable. They had to completely modify their home to make it compliant for someone who was paralyzed from the neck down. And their life changed in a moment through, an unfortunate set of circumstances at an intersection. That thrusts someone into food insecurity. That thrusts someone into, completely different medical expenses than they ever anticipated.
And likely a different economic bracket.
And a different economic bracket. I mean, he can't drive a truck anymore, right? His wife is now working to try and provide support for the family. They're blessed to have some really good close family ties, but it's still not enough. So there's all kinds of unexpected, unforeseen circumstances that can put someone into food insecurity, can put somebody into poverty, can put somebody into a set of situations that they would have never expected.
I often say, or to tell other people about the work that we do, I say we collectively, because the people that you serve are very much the same people that we serve. That poverty is the only classifier, really, if you will, that anybody can fall into at any time, maybe alongside disability, as you just mentioned. That at any moment something might happen that was unforeseen, as you said, unpredicted, and not planned for. And those are very much the people that we are working alongside. And it matters so much to us at Community Action that we use the phrase, rather than call people low-income people, we say people with low income. And it's because we want everyone to know always that these are people first, that these are circumstances that could happen to anybody at any time. And also, more than that, we also work so hard alongside them to make sure that it is non-recurring, that it is temporary. We want to move them through the circumstances that they find themselves in right now as quickly as possible and help them get back to more stable and thriving circumstances. So at a minimum, it's important that we share, that it's important that we use the right words to talk about what it is that we're doing. And so I appreciate your perspective, your joint perspective, on that.
Well, one of the things that we often talk about is we're fighting hunger, but we're fighting hunger to deliver hope.
Yeah.
Right? And, there's all kinds of stereotypes and cliches and whatnot that folks use.
Yes.
We think about the access to food as an opportunity, a catalyst, a hand up, not a hand out.
That's right.
to allow folks to find that place in life where they're trying to get to through a pathway that they may not have ever expected to be in. And our role is to get some resources to those individuals who are trying to find that place in life where they're trying to get to in a way that is as respectful and as unbiased as we can in right now what are some difficult circumstances.
That's right.
You know, it's the pandemic has really helped a lot of people to see, you know, what's really going on in our communities. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about how the national outlook, we see on the news that there are several distribution centers, food distribution centers, where the huge long lines and people are being turned away. We want to know, how does that reflect the national view on our view here in Kentucky?
Okay.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after this.
During these very difficult times, Community Action Council is on the front lines, caring for our neighbors as we have over the past 55 years. We're safely helping individuals and families access shelter, food, energy assistance, and health care. We're also ensuring families with young children have baby formula and diapers. We're continuing to prioritize education, using virtual learning to help us teach our Head Start children and engage our youth. Things look a little different right now, but we are Community Action Council, and we're made for this.
Switch out the...
Whether through our Head Start at Home virtual learning or in-person learning, the Prep Academy offers you early childhood education to suit your child and family. With either option, children will receive 2/3 of their daily nutrition, have access to health services through our nurse practitioner, and explore family engagement opportunities to help families achieve their goals. The choice is yours. To enroll your child in one of our Prep Academies or in Head Start at Home, call Community Action Council today or go online at comaction.org.
Community Action Council is launching Help for Home, a local initiative to raise funds for rental assistance for families who have been economically impacted by COVID-19 and are now facing the threat of eviction. You know, it seems that two of the most frequently used words over the last few months has been the phrase "at home." For some right now, those words are stirring up a sense of fear and uncertainty, as thousands in our community are still struggling from the loss of a job or from being underemployed. For others, those words are stirring up a sense of gratitude and a deep desire to help. It is our hope that Help for Home can be the bridge for that help. If you would like to contribute, you can donate easily any amount of money by texting the phrase "Help for Home" to the number 243-725. If you would like to give online or by check, please visit our website at comaction.org.
Halligan.
Thank you for helping us help others stay in their homes.
We're back. We're talking with Mike Halligan with God's Pantry Food Bank. Mike, before the break, we were really talking about what you all do and how your services and our services kind of work together. I'm interested in we see on the national news that so many different people are in need and are being turned away. We're seeing long lines. And how does that national view reflect on what's going on here in Kentucky, that's going on with the people that we serve?
So one of the things I think is important for folks to understand, Feeding America, the National Hunger Relief Organization, has been doing a lot of research and a lot of monitoring of how COVID-19 is impacting food insecurity. National estimates are food insecurity will increase by some 20 to 33%, depending on where you live and what your circumstances are. So in central and eastern Kentucky, that would take us from about 250,000 to over 300,000 people that are food insecure.
Wow.
And we've seen that. In the first weeks of the pandemic, the distributions that we do with Community Action over in Cardinal Valley, with St. Luke, with Central Christian, we saw weeks where it was double what it had been before the pandemic.
Wow.
Right now, on the average, we're about 20% above where we were prior to the pandemic. In the month of November, it's actually accelerated a little bit, for lack of a better word. We're at about a 33% increase versus where we were prior to the pandemic. That's the second wave. That's the higher positivity rates. That's restaurants and hospitality industry having to go back to curbside and not having in-person services, those kinds of things. But we've been able to avoid the long lines. And I think part of that is the tremendous cooperation that we see in the community. I think back to some of the things that we were doing over in Cardinal Valley with the mass distributions that we did in April and in May and a little bit into June. And one of the things that stood out to me the first time that we did it was we had, I wouldn't even be able to hazard an exact guess on the number of volunteers, but it had to be close to 100 people, at least 75, to serve about 300 households. And we were able to do that distribution in about 2 hours.
Yes.
The line of cards did not get out onto Versailles Road, right? It was contained within the parking lot. And I think it's because of the efficiency.
Right.
And frankly, some of it has to do with the size of the community.
Right.
Some of those things that we've seen nationally, San Antonio, Texas kind of stands out to me. San Antonio, Texas is the 7th largest city in the United States.
Right.
They're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, right, versus 350 that live in the Lexington area and 500,000 in Fayette County. So part of it is we're a smaller community. We have the same kinds of resources that they have in San Antonio, Texas, but we work really, 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 really well together. We collaborate with one another on how to do stuff. We figure it out as we go, and we've been fortunate to avoid those long lines.
And I think too, with COVID, it's a moving target.
Yeah.
Every week, people are losing their job.
Right.
People are losing their housing,
Right.
So the circumstances are changing. And I know we used to look at a snapshot of it, say quarterly.
Right.
But this one seems like it's more weekly. So have you experienced a different, I don't know, how do I say it? Different people.
A different level of demand.
So I think there's a couple things that are important to think about. One, food insecurity in Central and Eastern Kentucky was about 16.5% prior to the pandemic. Nationwide, it was 11%. So we were 50% higher than the national average. Which speaks to some of the challenges that our region has faced for years in terms of poverty and food insecurity and loss of jobs, whether it be Central Kentucky or whether it be Eastern Kentucky. So I think that's part of it. I think the other thing that's important to remember, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before the break, sometimes folks are just one unfortunate circumstance away from being food insecure. So think about the hospitality industry.
Right.
Think about restaurants. Think about the things that we saw during shutdown. Folks who have never been out of work were all of a sudden out of work for the first times in their lives. And we see a lot of folks that didn't really know where to turn to, didn't really know how to access food. And because of community action and so many other partners that we work with, we were able to identify ways that we could help individuals who were looking for help. There's a similar thing that happened about a year and a half ago that we kind of have forgotten about. There was a government shutdown, right? We saw the same thing then. We saw folks that were government employees that all of a sudden were unemployed for a period of time because of the government shutdown.
Right.
And they found themselves in a situation where they were hungry and they needed some support. So it's not like we haven't had to deal with this before. Never have we had to deal with it as a pandemic.
Sure.
But that whole notion of being an unfortunate circumstance away from being food insecure. Now, pandemic is certainly unprecedented. It's certainly daunting. The number of folks that we are seeing are certainly dramatically higher than we've probably ever seen in our history.
Right.
I've read recently, and I recall reading some years ago that food banks like yours found themselves receiving an uptick in donations of food. And when they kind of did an analysis of why that might be, like a significant uptick, they found, I believe, I can't cite my source because it's been a couple of years since I read this, but it was that people who thought that they were going to be in need at some point of the food pantry were giving while they had the resources to give, and that kind of cyclical idea. And I'm wondering about whether you can speak truth to that.
So this one's a little different. What's really interesting about the food industry right now is how much demand exists in the general public for food from a grocery store. Mm-hmm. Typically, and this kind of gets back to earlier, you were asking me about my history. So I actually worked in the food and grocery product industry for about 35 years, worked for Quaker Oats, worked for PepsiCo, worked for Conagra Foods. Generally speaking, about half of the meals consumed are consumed at home. Mm-hmm. And about half the meals that are consumed at restaurants or at food service establishments or, other types of eating away from home. During the pandemic, it's 90% at home and 10% away from home.
Right.
The supply chain can't change that fast. Mm-hmm. So when you go into a grocery store and you see an empty shelf with no toilet paper or a lack of canned goods, it's because the supply chain has dramatically changed and manufacturers are having to deliver product at 90-10 versus 50-50 in-home eating occasions versus eating away from home. On top of that, global supply chain has changed. Sure. So here's something that some people may know, some people don't. There's actually a shortage of aluminum cans right now. So even if a manufacturer wanted to make a can of green beans, they may not have the raw materials to manufacture more because there's a shortage of aluminum cans right now. So all of that leads up to our source of food has changed. We're actually seeing less donations of food right now because there's so much more going on in grocery stores for sales. Fortunately, we're seeing an increase in government commodities. So because of the Coronavirus Act, because of the CARES Act, the federal government appropriated more dollars to be able to buy more food that helps us maintain our source of supply, our source of stock, even though supply is totally different. That's the first time and I've been doing hunger relief work for 25 years in one form or another.
Sure.
That's the first time I've ever seen that.
Wow.
So that's a different dynamic than anything we've ever experienced before. And, thank goodness for the federal government, the Family First Coronavirus Act and the CARES Act for providing some assistance to help us through this difficult time. That's one of the reasons why what you hear in the media right now about having another policy being passed, whether it be for extending of unemployment insurance or whether it be for another stimulus check or whatever it may be, a portion of that is to help with supply side so that we still have the food that we need to be able to access to get it to those that are hungry. That's different than I've ever seen before. And it's, we're so fortunate that folks recognize that need and found a way of helping us get there.
Yeah, because with this changing so much, it's just, it's scary to think that the supply will end, that we'll be in a place where, we'll have to turn people away. And it's happening. It's not happening necessarily here with us right now, but, it's something. And you're saying that donations are down for
food donations, right? Yeah. So financially, typically what we see during an economic downturn, or in this case, a pandemic, typically social service type organizations do see an uptick in financial donations. We've certainly seen that.
Yeah.
We've also seen an uptick in demand. Right. So we're still relatively well balanced in terms of the funding that we have to be able to do the work that we do. That goes all the way back to the beginning of the show where I talked about the passion and compassion that people in Kentucky have. We've absolutely seen that through financial support.
That's right.
Wow.
Are we worried about what tomorrow looks like? Yeah. Are we worried about whether this pandemic carries on for another year, which is what some of the more worrisome folks are concerned about. I just saw an article this morning on a gentleman who used to work for the World Bank and was part of the World Health Organization and did a lot of other things. And his prediction is it could be another year in the United States because of the difficulty and the logistics of getting a vaccine out and having enough people receive the vaccine in order for it to take effect to the whole society.
Right.
But having said all of that, do we have enough food today to meet the need? We do. Do we have the financial resources today to help us get there? We do. Are we nervous? Absolutely.
Yeah.
We don't know what tomorrow's going to look like.
Right.
And we kind of take this thing one day at a time, and we work really hard to make sure that those resources that are afforded to us, that we're, number one, good stewards of them, and we do all the right things with them.
Absolutely.
And number two, we're constantly thinking about how much more food do we need for tomorrow or next week or next month. And we monitor closely to make sure that we don't have, number one, long lines, and number two, have to turn people away. And so far, we haven't had to do either of those.
Yeah.
And let's hope it stays that way.
Absolutely.
So, Mike, you mentioned the generosity. I remember a headline from the Herald Leader a couple of years ago calling Lexington, I think it was the second most generous community of our size. And I really resonated with that because I hear so much of what you're saying is very much the story of community action. And so I just say, you're absolutely right. And so I'm curious just to be able to talk a little bit about that obviously for organizations like ours, for you, food donation, for both of us, financial contributions, but then there's also the human capital. And I think I can speak for the God's Pantry Food Bank when I say certainly for Community Action Council, that so much of the work that we do is dependent upon volunteerism, which took a major hit in and of itself this year. So I'm going to kind of ask you an assortment of questions.
Sure.
Just go with whichever way you want to with it. But so we are here because we are a Community Action Council is a location for God's Pantry Food Bank.
Yep.
I believe
Partner agency.
Thank you. I believe we are one of 4 in Lexington. At least that might have been true before the pandemic, and I don't know if that's still true today. But in general, talk a little bit about the volunteerism, and specifically before we got on air, we were talking about your sharing Thanksgiving and the Basket Brigade, and I'm curious just about how you all had to, just like all of us, had to kind of reach deep, modify what you were doing, and be able to utilize human capital that we are so grateful to have in the way of volunteerism in a different manner.
So let's talk about a couple of different things. First, partner agencies. So in Fayette County, specifically in Lexington, there are several layers of cooperation between agencies. If you go all the way back to our history, a pantry, a place where someone goes to get food access, there are 4 partner agencies that work directly with God's Pantry Food Bank on food distribution.
Okay.
Community Action over in Cardinal Valley.
Yes.
St. Luke over in Alumni Drive. Central Christian on Short Street in downtown, and then North Broadway Christian on North Broadway. Those are the 4 pantries that God's Pantry Food Bank operates in conjunction with those 4 hosts. 3 of the 4 are operating. We're not actually doing anything at Broadway Christian right now. We could not find a way to socially distance and to do curbside delivery in the confines of that space.
Okay.
So we made a couple of changes over at Central Christian in order to make sure we had all of the protocols in place and that we didn't put people at risk.
Great.
And then we did some things a little different with Community Action and some things a little different with St. Luke.
Well, so you're kind of touching on something I was remembering, because that we modified. We went to what you alluded to earlier, the drive-through model, because it was we were fortunate that it was in the spring and the summertime where being outside isn't it's not always great because it's very hot, but it's not very cold. So I'm curious about modifications that you anticipate having to do even more, and maybe not. Maybe things are going to be able to stabilize now, but because of cold weather and kind of the holiday season in general, I'm wondering about any changes or to your distribution that you're anticipating or thinking about.
So we've learned so much in the last 8-10 months.
That's the truth.
We feel, yeah, no kidding. We feel pretty good about the way we're doing curbside deliveries right now.
Okay,
and I'll give you a good example of that. So the stuff that we developed with Community Action over in Cardinal Valley, when we were doing the mass distributions, we directly applied that to sharing Thanksgiving last week, right? How do we flow cars through a parking lot? How many volunteers do we need to manage the traffic? How many folks do we need to do registration and to match the number of food baskets that went to a household in a car? And in some kinds, it was one family. In some cases, it was 3 or 4. So, some of the cars got 1 basket, some of the cars got 4 baskets.
Sure.
All of the things that we did last spring and summer in Cardinal Valley are exactly what we did for the distribution for sharing Thanksgiving last week.
That's wonderful.
So you kind of build on the foundation and you figure out which bricks need a little bit more mortar,
Right.
and where you got to change the shape of the foundation. We slowly started to have volunteers re-enter our food bank. And one of the other things we did is we had a very generous donor that provided us an outside warehouse. So rather than having volunteers come to God's Pantry Food Bank on J.G. Fox Way, we had those volunteers go to a different site that was away from our main employment base, kind of created our own little pods, and worked with the volunteers in that separate location to reduce the risk for our employees, but also to reduce the risk for those volunteers. 3 weeks ago, well, just before Thanksgiving, we shut all of that down because of the governor's most recent appeal to all of us to do more social distancing and to do the things that the governor and the health professionals and the scientists have asked us to do. We've been able to ebb and flow volunteering for sorting food and packing food boxes and those kinds of things in a variety of different ways, including using the National Guard to help us do some of that work when we couldn't bring the average citizen, if there is such a thing as an average citizen anymore, right? Into the food bank or into that remote site to do the work. So a lot of imagining what one might do, a lot of contemplating around how could things work, with the focal point always being, is it safe? Will it be as productive as we can make it, being safe? And how do we make sure that not only are we providing safe, nutritious, wholesome food to those who are food insecure, but we're doing it in a way that doesn't put anybody else at risk? Have we experienced everything that we may need to experience yet? Probably not.
Right.
We'll know when we get there, when we got to do something different. Yeah, so it's exactly right. The cold weather's just beginning. So what does that look like, and how does that change things? And, we'll kind of figure it out as we go.
I think you all are probably like we are, that we have made a lot of changes, thrown into these changes, seeing how good it's really working. We're still able to keep going, and possibly how it will change how we do things from here on out.
Right.
So that's...
Well, so that brings up, so we're kind of wrapping up here the discussion overall, but I'm curious about that, you're alluding to a little bit, what are the silver linings of this pandemic for God's Pantry Food Bank, Mike?
So I think one of the silver linings, and it's what we talked about at the very beginning, it's seeing the passion and compassion that people have for one another. It's knowing, so earlier we were talking about the layers of different agencies that we work with. There are over 200 agencies in Fayette County that do referrals for folks that are food insecure. So imagine not having that network of agencies who identify someone who's food insecure. They may be coming in looking for heating assistance for a heating bill, and they're screened for food insecurity, and all of a sudden they're like, we need to get you in contact with God's Pantry Food Bank or some other agency that's doing hunger relief work. If we didn't have those 200 partner agencies at that layer of our interaction, we wouldn't have the referrals. We wouldn't necessarily know as much about the population, right? If we didn't have mass distributions where we could actually talk to people in cars and say, how long have you been waiting in line?
Right.
How is this working for you? We wouldn't have the insight from the people that we're serving to be able to figure out how to better provide those services. One of the things that we talk about in our mission statement all the time is community cooperation, working together. And that's all about communication, and that's all about learning from one another. So that's another silver lining that I've seen, is that people are willing, if you ask, and sometimes even if you don't ask, people are willing to share what their experiences are, and they don't do it from the standpoint of, how come you didn't do it this way instead of that way? It's, have you thought about this? Or, I've just experienced that. And it gives us great information with which to change services, whether it be working with Community Action or whether it be working with, any number of different agencies all over Fayette County and all across central and eastern Kentucky.
Yeah.
There was an organization down in Pikeville early in the pandemic. In one day, they saw 3 times the number of people that they normally see on a Friday.
Yeah.
They pick up the phone and they call us and they say, have you experienced this? So we start sharing information back and forth. That's another silver lining. It's that whole notion of doing good work, but not feeling like you got to figure it out for yourself. There's so many other organizations and people that you can lean on to help you understand what to do different.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This year is going to go down in the record books. And when we go back and reflect on what has been accomplished, how we had a pivot, how we come together and met the need, and we're still pushing. And that's important, especially for so many people who depend on that.
Right.
We're depending on you.
Well, and that the point you just made is a really important one. At the end of the day, this work is not about God's Pantry Food Bank. This work is not about community action. This work, in the case of hunger relief, is about 250,000 people in central and eastern Kentucky who are experiencing hunger. Mm-hmm. And how can we garner the strength and the resources and the support to keep those 250,000 people in the center of our decision making? Mm-hmm. And how can we do everything that is possible, and maybe some things that are impossible today, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that access to food is available to 250,000 people. It's not about God's Pantry Food Bank. It's about 250,000 people that are hungry in central and eastern Kentucky, and what can we do to change the course that they're trying to change? How can we help them do that?
So you said earlier that right now funding is good. Right now, the food is available.
Yep.
So what would you say that you would need from our audience, our listening audience? How can someone who wants to get involved, who wants to help out with God's Pantry Food Bank, what would you say?
So the economic support is always critical, right? We're pretty well balanced. Donations always help. Typically, December is the single largest month of the year for fundraising, and that's true for a lot of charities all over the country. That's no different, right? So the economic support, whether it be to God's Pantry Food Bank, whether it be to some other hunger relief organization, whether it be to community action that's doing phenomenal social services work, recognize that people are hurting, and the economic resources to help organizations that focus on social services, it's so critical right now. Yeah. You can get all kinds of information at our website, godspantryfoodbank.org. There's a place to donate securely. There's a place to, if you need help, based on the county you live in, where to get help. If you just want to learn about hunger and food insecurity, there's a wealth of information about what food insecurity looks like and what some of the programs are that we do in partnership with all kinds of agencies like Community Action and others.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mike. We thank everybody for listening to us, and for more information about what Community Action Council is doing, to echo Mike, please check us out on our Facebook page at Community Action Council or on our website at comaction.org.
On this Giving Tuesday, it's just so good to speak with partners and people of like mind who are out working in human services, and we appreciate all the donations. We appreciate the help that we get, the volunteers, all of those things that, help make us who we are. And as we reflect on Giving Tuesday, I just want to say thank you for the work that you do. Often we don't always hear the thanks, but today's a day.
Well, thank you so much. And like I said before, it takes a community to make a difference. Yes, and we've got a wonderful community that's willing to make a difference.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Let's Talk More Action.